based ecosystems measures, because there are some experiences of monitoring experiences in ecosystems, and we have experiences on monitoring on evaluation for adaptation. But talking about systems of monitoring and evaluation and adaptation based in ecosystems is quite ecosystem based adaptation is quite complicated, and we always wanted to address this topic because it is a topic that is quite complex, which is another topic, which is the indicators. So today we will start, and we will have Timo Leiter and Matthias Bertrand and Anneli Gomez. So we have some indications for you, as for language, for example, that you have the information on the buttons. My name is Juan Torres Guevara, and I'm going to be the moderator. And the questions can be done in advance using the chat window. So I think we can begin. We will start with Timo. I'm going to read something that I have about him, about his CV. Timo, he's an expert in monitoring and evaluation of ecosystem-based adaptation, and he's part of the GIZ team that proposes assistance to the unit of climate change of the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. Timo also works with other governments in order to support the process of development of national plans of adaptation and implementation of intervention for the climate change adaptation. In parallel, Timo is developing courses and guidelines for professionals about adaptation in developing countries. In his presentation, Timo will talk about the key elements, processes, and indicators that need to be considered in the follow-up and evaluation of adaptation measures. Timo, you have the floor for you to Timo, look.
I'm the active presenter, is that right? Yeah. I don't see the PowerPoint. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Buenos dias and welcome everyone. Very pleased to be here As the moderator just said, I'm working for GIZ, the German Technical Development Cooperation Agency, and I'm very pleased to present to you today an introduction to the topic of monitoring and evaluation of adaptation. And my colleague Matthias Bertram, who will present afterwards, will also illustrate to you a practical example of monitoring and evaluation of an ecosystem-based adaptation project. And I would like to start with a brief context about the topic of monitoring and evaluation in the context of the climate change negotiations which are taking place at the moment in Paris. And there is an international, let's say, push for M&E of adaptation. And as you can see on the slides, one of the reasons is that more and more financial support is being provided internationally for adaptation to climate change. And therefore, there's also a need to monitor and demonstrate the effectiveness and the results that have been achieved. Many countries are also beginning a process which is called the National Adaptation Plan process. Many countries have identified biodiversity as a key priority area for adaptation to climate change. And finally, many developing countries have put forth their so-called intended nationally determined contributions that basically say what the countries want to do on mitigation and on adaptation. And many countries have included specific targets on adaptation and on biodiversity as well. And that's why, so these are the reasons to be engaged in adaptation M&E at the national level. If you are looking more on individual projects or interventions, then how do you know if your EBA project is achieving its results? How do you know whether it actually achieves the end goal of adaptation, which is a reduction of the vulnerability to climate change? And monitoring and evaluation can help you to do so. And so this was a brief context to M&E in the international arena, the national arena, and the project level. So I'm going to the next slide now. You see key considerations for monitoring and evaluation. So because before we begin with the specific details of M&E, it is very important for every M&E undertaking that at the start you consider some crucial aspects. First of all is, of course, what do you want to do M&E for? What is the purpose of the monitoring and evaluation in the particular case? For example, do you want to have an ongoing monitoring system of a particular project to help manage the project, possibly to change actions during the course of the project? Or do you want to use evaluation to learn why projects have been leading to a particular result, or how they have been able to change and achieve results? So this is the central question. What do you want to do M&E for? Because that determines what your M&E system needs to look like. Secondly, and that's also very important, is to ask yourself at the outset, who should be using the information that is being generated by the M&E system? So imagine you would have that information available today. Who would be supposed to use that information? Because an M&E system is of no use if it ends up in a single report which no one reads. So the question is, who are the target users of the information of the M&E systems? And the third very important point is what resources are available, what expertise is available, what time is available, and what financial resources are available to actually build the M&E system. So these considerations are absolutely important. It happens very often that people ask me, Timo, what adaptation indicator can I use? But before we can answer that question, it's very important to look at exactly these key considerations. What is the M&E system for? And that determines how it should be designed. And that is a particular reason is that for adaptation M&E, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. There can be very different approaches depending on the purpose for M&E. And on the next slide, we are looking at, as the moderator said, M&E of adaptation to climate change is a difficult topic. And this slide shows us why that is the case. So if you look at the yellow button in the middle of the slide, success of adaptation to climate change is context specific. That is different from mitigation of greenhouse gases. If you look at the success of a mitigation project, you can measure it in a single unit, which is the avoided amount of greenhouse gas emissions. For adaptation to climate change, there is no such universal metric that could be used to easily measure the success of adaptation. And that is the first challenge, which you see in the top left of the slide. There is no universal indicator or metric for the success of adaptation. It always depends on the context. If you look at the second point in the top right corner, long time horizons. Climate change is unfolding over decades. So it is very difficult to say after a 3 or 5 year project whether the results have been sufficient to help the population adapt to climate change, because the impacts of climate change are still unfolding in the future. And this issue is particularly relevant for ecosystems. So if, for example, mangroves are being planted at the coastline to protect against flooding, it may take a decade for the mangroves to be of the right size to actually have that protective function. And by that time, the initial project, which has built the mangroves, may long be over. So the long time horizons make it complicated to evaluate adaptation success. Then on the right corner, on we have the issue of uncertainty. It is difficult to say in advance what exactly the climate change impacts in a certain location will be. It is difficult. Some events cannot be forecasted precisely. And there's also uncertainty. Now we're going to the next one, the complexity one. Complexity and uncertainty are connected because we're not just looking at climatic changes, but there are also social and political and economic changes. And these developments are interlinked. Social factors may also influence the success of a project. For example, if the local community is supporting the building of the mangroves, or if it is not supporting it, or if that support is changing over time, then this could be a reason why the project is not achieving its objective. So the social factors also need to be considered when we evaluate the success of a project. So for these 4 reasons, there's no universal metric to adaptation. Long time horizons are involved, particularly for ecosystem-based adaptation. There's an uncertainty in the specific climate impact at local level, and it's very complex. For these reasons make it difficult to evaluate and monitor adaptation to climate change. So what can be done? At the project level, or at the level of individual adaptation measures, the organization I work for, GIZ, has developed a guidebook to help practitioners to design an adaptation project, could be an ecosystem-based adaptation project, and to design a results-oriented monitoring system. And this is a stepwise approach. You see here on this slide 5 different steps. And we're going to briefly look at each of these 5 steps now in theory. And my colleague Matthias, in his presentation, will show you a practical example of how they can be used in practice. So if we look briefly at the first of the 5 steps, which is called describe the adaptation context. So this step is crucial because if you want to adapt to climate change, you would need to have an understanding what you or the ecosystem needs to adapt to. So you need to know what are the climate change risks or the factors, what is changing, is it getting hotter or drier, are the rainfall patterns changing, are the winds changing, is there increasing flooding, for example. So the first step of defining an adaptation project is to look at, gather information on these possible climate change impacts, and also considering once again the non-climatic factors, so which social changes are occurring. And this understanding is very important because this is the basis for you to develop a project that is actually an adaptation project and not just a regular development project that is just carrying the label of an adaptation project. The second step is called identifying the contribution to adaptation. And you see here this figure, this pyramid. The understanding here is that there are different ways in which a project can support adaptation. One thing is the left corner is building adaptive capacity. That means enabling people to undertake adaptation, and that would then lead to actual adaptation actions, which is the right corner, and that would lead to the purple top of the diagram, which is safeguarding sustainable development. So in the second step, the project team would look at how the project can support adaptation. Then the third step, and that is the crucial one, in this third step, you are developing an outline of what the project wants to achieve. So based on the adaptation context and the contribution, a so-called results framework would be developed. That means looking at what do you want to achieve and what activities do you want to undertake to get to these achievements, and then being specific about how each activity can lead to the respective outcomes. There are different ways in which this can be done. We are looking on the next slide of a rather simple example, a so-called results chain. You have probably seen this before. So a results chain is categorizing different things. So you have activities on the very left, which are supposed to lead to outputs. For example, you do a training, that could be an activity. The output is that people have enhanced knowledge about, for example, ecosystem-based adaptation. And the outcome could be that they are better able to manage ecosystems as a result. And the final outcome, the green box, would be that this helps in the long term to better adapt to climate change. So this is one way to develop a logical chain of activities which you can then monitor. A more complex example, which is not linear but more interconnected is this one. So this is an alternative to what we've just seen on the previous slide. Same idea. The idea is to map how different activities of the project link together to achieve the overall objective of the project. The details of this graphic and the case study which you see here from India are all explained in the guidebook Adaptation Made to Measure. So if you want to see the details of this particular case, I invite you to have a look at the guidebook. So this is just here an illustration of how this can be done. And why is this important for monitoring? Because if you have mapped what you want to do, then you can know what you need to monitor. So then you can monitor if these things are taking place. You can monitor whether they are actually leading to the change which you wanted. So you can monitor if your assumptions have been correct and if achievements have taken place. This is sometimes also called a theory of change. Yeah, then if we go to step number 4, once you have developed your results framework, most often people want to use indicators. Indicators are not the only tool for M&E. You could also base M&E on qualitative insights by doing interviews, asking beneficiaries if they feel the project has, if they have benefited from it, what changes they have perceived to have taken place. So indicators are not the only tool, but indicators are very often used. So once you've developed your theory of change in the previous step, in this step you can then look at which indicators would fit to the different activities. It is important that indicators fulfill a certain criteria. They are further defined in the guidebook. These criteria include that they are valid, which means that they actually measure what you want them to measure and not something else, that they are reliable, they are relevant, and so on. And it's very important for adaptation M&E systems that the indicators actually capture what the adaptation is about. So not, if possible, not just trying to say, okay, on an output level, a training has taken place, but what was the result of that training? What have the participants done with that particular knowledge after the training? So going beyond the immediate output level to more use of outputs or outcome level. If you have defined your indicators, then it's also important to set a baseline, which basically means that you define what the situation was at the beginning of the project, and then you can compare this to the progress over time. The guidebook also describes further approaches. For example, if the social, political, or climatic changes are so drastic over a longer period of time that you can no longer compare it to the initial situation, then different tools are needed, and this is also explained in the guidebook. Yeah, then, because everyone is always asking, what is an adaptation indicator? GIZ has compiled a list of possible adaptation indicators. They have been taken from national adaptation M&E systems, but some of them can also be used on a subnational level. The publication which you see here includes some 100 indicators. And what is important is that for each indicator is described in detail why it is an adaptation indicator, what the relevance of the indicator is for adaptation to climate change. All these publications and the guidebook Adaptation Made to Measure are available on our website adaptationcommunity.net, and they are also available in Spanish. Coming to the final step and my final, almost final slide, The fifth step, once you have identified your theory of change and your indicators, it is needed to operationalize the M&E system. That means you need to see where could you get data from. Oftentimes, indicators are limited by the availability of data. So that is a crucial question. What is actually feasible to acquire? Which data can you get? And then there are the operational questions of who is doing the monitoring, where is the data stored, how is it being analyzed, and very important, the knowledge management. What do you do with the results and with the information? Do you write a report? Do you write a briefing for decision makers? Do you put it on a website? What are the outcomes of the M&E system? And these aspects are addressed in this step number 5. And finally, to help practitioners on the ground to do monitoring of adaptation to climate change, we have also developed an Excel tool based on these 5 steps. And you can enter data directly into the Excel tool. So the Excel tool can be used as an ongoing basis for monitoring. Up to 33 indicators can be included in the Excel tool. And what is also a very good feature of that, or useful feature, is that it shows you the progress which you make over time on your indicators. So in the Excel tool, you can define for each indicator a value at the start, the baseline, and you can identify, and then you can define what you want the indicator to be at a certain point in time, and you can enter your actual monitoring values, and then it compares what you want to achieve to what you have achieved, and then you can generate such a diagram on the project progress. So this is a very helpful tool for project managers. Yeah, and that was the quick introduction to our guidebook, Adaptation Made to Measure. Once again, I invite you to download the guidebook and the Excel tool on our website, adaptationcommunity.net. What you see on this slide here is the starting page of the website. And if you click on monitoring and evaluation, you will get to an overview of the different tools and publications where you can download them. And yeah, with that, I would like to say thank you very much. Muchas gracias. I am happy to take questions. And once again, my colleague will present you a practical example of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Timmy. Really educational, your presentation. I think that the great topics have been addressed, and I'm sure Matthias and Ali are going to talk about this. The indicators, the baseline, the complexity, the social factors are also entered there. I think there are central topics that are shared among all the people that have to do with this evaluation and monitoring process. And we have the question part. We are looking at the chat. As we agree, the questions, you can use the chat to answer the questions. While you ask your questions, you mentioned something that is quite important, which is the metric. That is one of the things that the units to be used in monitoring systems is something that takes time. And something that I think is important is actually the number of indicators, and I think that is a central topic, a really important topic, and also consensus. Because in order to compare the results, it is always useful to have consensus at the unit level that we're going to use.
Yes, exactly. It is very important to look at the number of indicators which you are using, and the number of indicators is directly related to the purpose. So if the purpose is merely for accountability reasons, meaning that you want to demonstrate through the funding source of the project that progress has been achieved, then a limited number of indicators may be sufficient. If the purpose is for you to learn what is working and what is not working, then you may need a different set of more indicators, also supplemented by qualitative information. So yeah, the number of indicators is an important consideration, and the workload that is connected to that. I'm looking at there's one question from Alicia in Spanish. I have to use Google Translator to translate that, because unfortunately I don't speak Spanish, so I have to go first to the question by Anna Willingshofer. She's asking about the process of how indicators are being developed. Well, if it's about indicators to support management of a project, then ideally you would have a participatory process of the people who are involved in the project. This could be done at the beginning of the project together with the development of the theory of change, so looking at what the project wants to achieve, and then trying to see what would you like to see as a result of the project. And that could guide you to drafting what indicators could look like. But then it's an iterative process, because you also need to look at what data is available. Sometimes, so there can be different steps. For example, first brainstorming a wish list of indicators that you would like to have, and then comparing these indicators to the data availability. And finally, then it's important to look in detail if the indicators are specific enough, and there's so-called a SMART rule, which means, are the indicators specific? Are they meaningful? Do they have a time horizon attached to them? So the quality criteria for the indicators themselves. There are more questions. From Alicia. Okay, so there's an English translation, I believe, here. Thank you very much for this. The question is about examples of vulnerability assessments and trends of wide grains. Not so sure what is meant by that. But yeah, so when the adaptation project is being developed, ideally it's being informed by some type of vulnerability assessment, which looks at the adaptive capacity, the sensitivity, and that could inform the project development, and that could also support indicators for M&E. That's also a good point. So because the goal of adaptation is to reduce vulnerability, what you can also do is to repeat the same vulnerability assessment over time. Let's say do it at the beginning of the project and do it after 3 or 4 years, and then see if your vulnerability indicators have changed. And if you can say that your project has contributed to this change, then this could be a very good way to say whether progress has been achieved. So if vulnerability indicators are monitored over time, they could be used as adaptation indicators too. I'm looking at further questions if I haven't missed anyone. Process of elaboration we talked about the vulnerability assessment. On our website, Adaptation Community, you also find the topic of vulnerability assessment. There's a detailed guidebook called the Vulnerability Sourcebook, which describes step by step how a vulnerability assessment can be done and how it can be used for monitoring and evaluation purposes. So maybe this can provide you with further details as well. I believe I've responded to the...
Creo que ya respondí a todas las preguntas. Thank you, Timo. We will give the floor now to Matthias. Matthias, I don't know if you are there, if you hear me correctly. I'm going to give a brief summary of Matthias. Quite interesting, the exposition, so Timo's exposition, and now we will continue with Matthias. Matthias, he's a consultant for adaptation-based ecosystem-based adaptation of the corporation German corporation GIZ. Matthias is involved in the global project, including the adaptation, the ecosystem-based adaptation in strategies and process of politics that is charged by the Ministry of Environment of Germany, implemented by GIZ, Mexico, Peru, and Philippines, South Africa, and Vietnam. From 2013 and 15, Matthias was consultant for forestry policies and climate change in the project between Indonesia, Germany, and the program of climate change implemented by GIZ. There, the project of Ministry of Environment and Forests in the integration of the aspects in order to improve the governance, forestry governance, and measures against the climate change in national policies and sub-national policies. He has coordinated several forestry projects and the RED Plus project and climate change. Matthias will talk about practical examples of monitoring and evaluation of EBA measures of the program called Integrated Management and Protection of Ecosystem in the coast of Vietnam. Matthias, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Yes, hello. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Juan, for this nice introduction. I think I'm on. I hope you can understand me well in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, wherever you are. My name is Matthias Bertram. I'm an advisor for ecosystem-based adaptation in a global project for mainstreaming EBA in planning and decision-making processes. And I just recently joined the team in September, so it's a fairly new project. I'm a colleague of Timo, so working for German Technical Corporation based in Germany. But we have a bigger team, and our intention is also to broaden the cooperation with Latin America, Africa, and Asia on EBA. So I'm looking forward to the continuous exchange with you guys in the EBA community. I'm just wondering if I can see the presentation here. Maybe I just click on the next one. Here we are. Okay. So as Timo already mentioned, GIZ has developed a methodological framework how to set up monitoring and evaluation systems for adaptation or ecosystem-based adaptation. And I would like to share with you one practical example how this framework can be applied at a project or program level. And the example is one program from Vietnam, which is called Integrated Coastal and Mangrove Protection Climate Change and Coastal Ecosystem Program. Apologies for the long name of the program, but it's in fact a merger of two programs which have been financed by the German government and also the Australian and the Vietnamese government. So what is the content of of the project. It's a joint initiative between the government of Vietnam, the government of Germany, and the government of Australia, implemented by the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development of Vietnam, with support from GIZ. So our colleagues are working on the ground at national level and at site level. And the objective of the program is to make coastal zones more resilient towards the impacts of climate change, or in other words, to conduct and improve sustainable management of coastal ecosystems for the purpose of adaptation to climate change, also reducing the poverty in Vietnam, and in close cooperation with the local population to improve the situation on the ground. And the location of the project is the Mekong Delta. So the project duration is 8 years. It's not long for an adaptation project, I have to say. But luckily, GIZ and Vietnam, or Germany and Vietnam, they have cooperated for 20 years, so we can build on a legacy of 20 years of practical experience on policy advice, capacity development, and piloting of measures on the ground. You can see the funding is quite substantial, with more than 30 million euros provided by the Australian, German, and Vietnamese government, and currently the program is initiating or starting the second phase, scaling up the best practices and lessons learned which have been conducted on the ground. I have to admit I'm not an expert of this program. I'm an expert of a global program, but our mandate is to take up these good practices and inform decision makers about the benefits of these kind of EBA and climate change adaptation projects. So if we look into the fields of work, the project is working in 4 components. Coastal governance, which means to integrate best practices of adaptation into policies at national and local level. Area management, which means stopping the loss of land and forests by technical measures, by co-management measures, and today I would like to focus on this component. Sustainable livelihood development, this means providing farmers and local communities with technology and knowledge about alternative farming methods, reduction of fertilizer, the cultivation of salt-tolerant rice species, and much more. Environmental awareness, how to communicate environmental problems, climate change, and disaster risk reduction to local stakeholders. Also providing trainings to teachers and students on the ground. However, I would like to focus on the field of work number 2, area of management, because the project is considered to be one of the most successful EBA projects funded by the German government, and a lot of experiences have been made in the last years. So Timo already explained to you the general guidance adaptation made to measure, which consists of 5 steps, and Timo explained very nicely the detailed components for each step. So it's a very practical tool which can be applied at project level. Needs to be adapted, of course, to each project context and site-specific context, and can be applied to various projects like this project in Vietnam. And I would like to guide you a little bit on each step and the experiences which have been made in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam. So looking into the first step, assessing the context for adaptation. First, it is of course important to understand the vulnerability of Vietnam, and especially Vietnam's coastline. So what you can see here in the dark blue color are the boundaries of Vietnam. And as you might know, the boundary on the east is all coastline. This is the Chinese Sea. And you can see that Vietnam, with a very long coastline, is highly exposed to current disasters, weather events, and therefore is also highly exposed to future impacts caused by climate change. And these kind of vulnerabilities can be categorized in four categories. Flooding, for instance, flash floods. This is especially affecting mountainous areas, storms and typhoons, and storm surges. And if we look into the socioeconomic features of Vietnam, we can see that the majority of people live in the coastal zone. And the red circle in the very south of Vietnam is indicating the area where the program is working. This is the Mekong Delta, and there the program is supporting 5 provinces in stabilizing the coastal zone and increasing the resilience of the people living there. In the Mekong Delta alone, there are 17 million people, and the highest elevation of the Mekong Delta is around 5 meters. Around 38% of the Mekong Delta are only 1 meter above sea level. So this is an indicator that sea level rise and storm surges will highly affect this region, which is also the rice basket of Vietnam. 55% of the rice which is produced in Vietnam comes from the Mekong Delta. So it is also a very important economic equation to make the communities and the provinces more resilient towards climate change. So in the last 50 years, Vietnam already observed a sea level rise of 10 centimeters. It doesn't seem to be much, but the impacts are quite significant, and there is also a higher frequency of storm surges and a longer period of storm and typhoon seasons. So in fact, people are already affected right now due to these disasters and climatic events. And the anticipated projection of sea level rise increase for Vietnam is about 65 to 100 centimeters until the end of this century. So in the next 85 years, there is an expected sea level rise up to 1 meter. And this would mean that around 38% of Vietnam's Mekong Delta will be flooded. So, of course, this is quite significant. Let's have a closer look on the Mekong Delta. It's a very dynamic landscape. What you can see here is the greenish part, the delta, with many cultivation activities. The Mekong itself is carrying a lot of sediments from Cambodia, from Laos to the delta. It's a very fertile region. However, this accumulation of sediments from the upstream areas is one effect. The other effects are erosion, also natural erosion from longshore currents and also tidal regimes. The coastline is covered by mangrove forests, but due to a degradation of these forests, the rate of erosion has significantly increased and is threatening the coastal population and ecosystem. So how does the situation look like? You can see here there's a mangrove belt covering the coastal zone, but if you would have visited this place, let's say 100 years ago, you would have seen that this mangrove belt is about 1 kilometer thick. Now this has changed significantly. Now you see maybe 200 to 400 meter thick mangrove belts, which is in fact caused, of course, by human activity. So there are two pressures. One pressure coming from the land side, which is agriculture production, shrimp farming, rice cultivation, but also local communities cutting mangrove trees either for firewood use, for commercial sale, for making charcoal, for instance. And then you have on the other side the pressure coming from the sea. Natural disasters, extreme weather events, storm surges, And sea level rise combined with flooding from the Mekong, which is also, well, it's a natural phenomena, but due to changing precipitation patterns in Southeast Asia, flooding events are also increasing over time. So the population and the ecosystem is facing several pressures at once. Well, in theory, there are many adaptation options. One is, of course, to rehabilitate and conserve the existing mangroves, or to even increase the area covered by mangroves. This would be called a soft or green nature-based solution. Well, the other option is to increase the sea dikes or to construct wave breakers, which is basically hard infrastructure or gray infrastructure. And of course, it's also possible to combine these elements in a kind of hybrid solution. So this is what the project has done to assess the current situation on the ground, the climate impacts, socio-economic developments, in order to define feasible adaptation actions. And the first conclusion from the site assessment was that soft solutions, like for instance the planting of mangroves, alone is not sufficient because currents are very strong, erosion is very severe, so it is not possible to achieve a higher resilience with mangroves alone. However, hard solutions, for instance, constructing a dike, a concrete dike, are not sufficient either because there are strong waves coming from the sea. There's a lot of sediments coming from the inland who cannot be accumulated in the floodplains, and there are many other disadvantages for the construction of dikes because they have to be maintained, they are very expensive, and sometimes they are also not socially so accepted because they do not generate any other co-benefits. So the program came to the conclusion it's a combination of different solutions which needs to be applied. And technical solutions, this was also quite clear from the outset, are not standalone activities. They need to be accompanied by improved governance structures, co-management structures to let local stakeholders, communities participate in the setup of coastal management plans, livelihood improvement activities, for instance, to support the diversification of crop cultivation, and also to enable environmental awareness campaigns at local level. So the solution was to combine different measures, and here you can see a kind of comparison between different measures which could be in fact implemented. On the left side, on the top, you can see the comparison between energy dissipation of waves. This means the power a wave has and the power with which it hits the shoreline compared to the, let's say, gray or green infrastructure methods. And if you have a dike, for instance, and a low floodplain, this means that a lot of wave energies will hit the dike, which means it is more exposed to this kind of effects and needs to be maintained in regular intervals. So the project came to the conclusion we have to apply which is called an area coastal protection system, combining different elements, combining the existing dikes with a higher floodplain. A higher floodplain is able to already reduce the energy of the waves from the outset, and in combination with mangrove rehabilitation, mangrove conservation, the energy of the waves can significantly be reduced. And in this example, you can see that mangrove trees are the first line of defense, so to say, and they achieve that the dike maintenance can be reduced. Dikes, in this case, act as the last barrier, only absorbing very extreme storm surge events. So this was the setting, basically. In the step 2, the program looked into feasible adaptation options, and I'm now selecting only one technical element, which is the establishment of breakwater fences. They are also called T-fences because they have a T-shaped structure, and they are in fact a low-cost technology. It's made of bamboo, and this is quite new to Vietnam, but these kind of structures have already been used in Europe in the last 400 years. The innovative part of it is that it is a combination of hydrological modeling to see how the shapes should look like and how they could break waves, how they could also lead to an improved sedimentation. However, it's a pioneer project in Vietnam, and it has already been taken up by additional initiatives in Vietnam, but also in Indonesia. So how is the system working? It's basically a construction of T-fences, bamboo fences, in the coastal zone, in the mud flats, in the flood plains, and it has two purposes. First, to keep sediments, which means soil is accumulating and allows mangroves to grow. This is the effect on the inland. On the seaside, the effect is that the energy of the waves is reduced, which means that mangroves can be rehabilitated. So in the development of the result framework, which Timo explained to you, the program identified several impact indicators. For instance, the area of maintained mangroves in hectares, the area of rehabilitated floodplain in hectares. So the length of protection structures, these are the bamboo T-fences in meters or kilometers. The number of people less vulnerable to extreme events, and in this case a special study was conducted which is called Saved Wealth and Saved Health. I will explain this study later on. The percentage of co-management plans which have been signed by local communities to improve the governments. And of course, if we look into livelihoods, the income increase, for instance, in US dollars per hectare in year from livelihood improvement measures like rice cultivation, for instance, or adapted aquaculture. So coming to the special study on saved health and saved wealth, in fact, it was tested not at provincial level. It was tested only in one community, the Autobi village, which in fact is a small village along the coastline, which is roughly about 2.7 kilometers long. It's a very long village, and it is located between the sea and the dike. So 700 people or more than 100 families are, of course, highly exposed to natural disasters and climate change. And this study applied a result framework with two indicators. One is called saved wealth. It's in fact a mixture of different indices. For instance, providing information on loss prevention in the context of public infrastructure, buildings, roads, for instance, houses, private property, and also loss of income, for instance, from aquaculture, from agriculture, from fisheries. So this kind of indicator or index can be expressed in monetary terms, for instance, in US dollars. The saved health is a quite complex mixture of indicators. It means avoided diseases, avoided disabilities, and life losses. So the idea is that a project or an initiative can help communities in a specific region to reduce diseases, to reduce the losses of life. It's in fact a kind of alternative to monetize the value of a human life, which in fact is not possible. So it's a different approach. It's rooted in initiatives from the World Health Organization. It was introduced by the World Bank in the early 90s, and this study included this indicator as well. However, the study went further, not only to compare the impact of mangrove rehabilitation on the local population, but also to compare different adaptation options. In this case, the real or the existing mangrove rehabilitation program, the T-fence approach, versus, let's say, hypothetical project, which is the construction of concrete dikes or the upgrade of concrete dikes. And it also used several Excel spreadsheets to conduct its calculations. So what kind of parameters have been used in this study? I have to admit it's not an M&E study, it's a simulation or projection of potential future events, but it could be used for a future M&E system at local level. So the projection of this study was 20 years until 2033, and it included different parameters like extreme weather intensity and duration. So this is including storms, floods, and other events, extreme weather frequency, how these events are changing over time, taking climate scenarios into consideration, the value of public and private property. There, the study looked into the last 10 years and also the experiences in property values and how much they are exposed to weather events, disasters, the number of deaths and incidences also from the last 10 years, and also the maintenance costs, let's say, for dikes or mangroves during the project lifetime. Now, the results are quite interesting. First of all, there is a clear economic impact, and in this specific case, the study came to the conclusion that mangrove planting is more favorable because it's not only cheaper, but it is also generating a series of co-benefits, for instance, from food and raw material collection. The mangroves are also the breeding ground for around 70% of all fish species which are caught in the region. And there was another study done where the conservation of 1 hectare of mangrove forests will result in 1 ton of fish production per year, which is quite significant, and this would equal around about 37,000 US dollars income per year. So these kind of impacts have been included in the calculation, and basically mangrove benefits are about 5 times higher than dike benefits in terms of saved wealth and also in terms of saved health. Mangroves, the indice of mangrove rehabilitation is much higher than in case of building a concrete dike. So, but coming back to a more practical example, or maybe an example which is easier to understand when defining indicators and setting up a baseline in a project. So what we can see here is an aerial photograph indicating the loss of coastline in hectares or the erosion in meters per year. The green contour line is it's the current shore, and you can see that ideally where the red T-fences are located, this would be the ideal coastline, and in fact this was the coastline a few years ago. So you can, in this specific context, easily identify impact indicators and the baseline. I have to admit this is only one specific example now in the M&E framework. What is quite interesting is to see the immediate results after 1 year. So, for instance, the project constructed the T-fences and not only let natural generation happen in the area, but also planted actively mangrove trees. So this would be, in this specific context, the adaptation action indicators, the length of T-fences built and the area planted. And what you can see on the pictures in this specific example is that T-fences were very successful not only in stopping erosion, but also allowing sediments to grow, to accumulate, and in fact to regain land from the sea. So this is a quite impressive impact. And the total project allowed a rehabilitation of 10 hectares, which are 20 football fields. So this is a quite interesting result. So you can, in this specific example, clearly measure two adaptation indicators, which is the area rehabilitated and the erosion prevented, or in other words, also the amount of land regained from the sea. So coming back to the immediate results of the program, this is what could be achieved in the last years until 2013 in one province, in the Sok Trang province. 320 hectares of mangroves were maintained, 10.8 kilometers of T-fences have been built at low cost, saving a lot of money, generating many impacts on the ground. It was possible to reduce the vulnerability of around 27,000 people in the area. 10 hectares of the floodplain could be rehabilitated, and 100% of the community signed co-management agreements with the provincial government in order to manage the coastal zone in a more sustainable way. When we come to livelihoods, the income increase per crop, in this case rice per hectare, could be improved by $200. It was possible to reduce the water consumption on the agriculture fields, to reduce pesticides, and in fact also to reduce the erosion. I'm getting now the warning that we are running out of time. Thank you for this reminder. Coming to some conclusions, of course. Well, in the context of the program, it was of course possible to measure several result indicators for EBA, especially mangrove rehabilitation and erosion prevention, but we have to be careful because this is due to sedimentation of the Mekong Delta. In the context of more complex indicators, like in the case of the Saved Health, Saved Wealth study, significantly higher resources, money and time is needed to collect the data, and data availability is of course a concern, especially at the local level. And the example in Vietnam also showed that it is possible to for EBA measures to show clear co-benefits to implement activities in a very cost-effective manner, and to be also socially accepted by the local population. Of course, the challenge is to measure evidences at a broader scale, not only in one village, but at the provincial level or even national level, bearing the limited capacities in mind that countries have. Maybe because we are running out of time, I would briefly like to take this opportunity to share with you the this setting of our global mainstreaming EBA project. So we will support a set of key actors in countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia to apply methodological approaches and tools for mainstreaming EBA in policies and strategies. We will closely cooperate with 5 countries: Mexico, also Peru, South Africa, Vietnam, the example I've just mentioned, and the Philippines. But of course, our network is very open to other exchange partners: Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Grenada, India, Indonesia, Mali, and Thailand. But it will be open for more stakeholders and actors later on. And basically, the project is working in 4 core areas. One is to set up a EBA mainstreaming toolbox to define strategies and tools, how policymakers can systematically integrate EBA in decision making at different levels. We analyze evidences for EBA advantages. So like the example of Vietnam, we try to collect a catalog of EBA projects, measures, and tools which can be applied at a broader scale. And we will support the 5 countries in piloting some of these tools, for instance, on vulnerability assessments, on selecting adaptation options, or even M&E. And finally, we will also support networking and communication. So besides this community of practice, we are looking forward to collaborate and cooperate with you, also via the Adaptation Community Net portal. This map is just illustrating our partners. So we are not only working with countries and the governments, but also with international organizations. And yes, I think this would be all from my side. Just one example how M&E systems could be applied at a local level, at project scale. So I thank you very much for your attendance. Muchas gracias, and I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Matthias, thank you very much. Really important topic. You talked about something that comes below or implicit, which is the time, the duration time of the monitoring systems. I think it was a great 8 years, and you talked about 20 years, and I think that is key in a monitoring system, even more in southern countries, when the climate variability, because it's rainforest, tropical rainforest, and I imagine here in Peru we have manglars also in the north zone, and ecosystems, mountain ecosystems also, where we have a great climate variability, and what we need is monitoring systems that would need to last longer. The time, it's key. It's a key factor. And what I have seen in this latest map, it's a great presence that they have in the south and north that helps other topic that for me it's important, the monitoring system, the consensus on the indicators, because that is implicit also the consensus, the units, as Timo said, the units, the metrics, the baseline, and also indicators are really complex. We hope for the questions, Matthias, and thank you very much.
Yes, Juan. So thank you very much. I can see some questions have already been raised here in the chat, and the point you mentioned is quite right. The time scale, also as Timo mentioned, is a very big challenge for adaptation projects. So not only the units, and from practical experience, I would say it would be important to focus on, let's say, less indicators which can be measured. As Timo mentioned, it's really the question for which the M&E system is be set up. In this specific case in Vietnam, the idea was to stabilize the coastal zone. So this was, let's say, the scope or the framework. And we were lucky to build on a legacy of 20 years of cooperation. So in fact, this program did not start from scratch, but could build on existing work of the Vietnamese and the German governments. But I can see there are some additional questions in the chat. I think one is coming from Alicia. In what phase is the EKI project? I think you are referring to our project. Well, this is just the start of our project. So we have, of course, identified our partners at country level, but we are open, of course, to international partners. Let's say to exchange ideas on how EBA mainstreaming could happen in practice. I hope that this is answering your questions. I can see Claudia. She's asking, yeah, the example is very interesting. Benefits have been mentioned. Sorry, I have to read the whole thing. Yeah, there are different challenges because it shows the benefits of combination of gray and green adaptation. Exactly. An EBA exclusive project will have other times, yes, and different challenges defining changes. You're very right. So if we have an EBA project which is focusing, of course, on natural ecosystems only, so it's not a hybrid approach, but it's a 100% green approach. We are talking about longer time periods. This is quite clear. I'm a forester by profession, so in Germany we foresters think in centuries. In the tropics it's a bit different, but you are quite right. You need several decades at least to show impacts. And in this Vietnam example, it is quite clear that the sedimentation rate of a big river like the Mekong allows to show quick results. Correct. Then we have another question, I think Dennis. It's a valuable and innovative experience. Okay, I think this is just a comment. Thank you, Dennis. And yeah, Juan, as you mentioned, the number of indicators. Yeah, this is exactly the key. We have to bear in mind capacity limitations on the ground. So the M&E system in Vietnam was attached to the project on the one side, but also to the provincial government monitoring system and the monitoring system of the National Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. You always have to keep in mind capacity limitations in the governments, in the organizations, not to overwhelm stakeholders and those people who are supposed to use the systems with too complex indicators. This is quite clear. So I'm wondering if I missed any of your questions. Juan, maybe you can help me out.
Thank you, Matthias. Yes, I think you answered all the questions. We give the floor then to Anneli Gomez. Thank you very much, Matthias. Anneli Gomez is an environmental engineer of the Universidad Nacional Agraria La Molina with a specialization in development studies of the Institute of Heights, International Studies in Development of Geneva. Anneli has worked in ecosystem-based adaptation projects in the mountains, especially in the strengthening of local capacities, research, and systematizations of experiences. And from 2013, she works in the Mountain Institute as a coordinator of the implementation of adaptation measures, robust adaptation measures, of third component of project adaptation, ecosystem-based adaptations in the mountains that is carried out at the land reserve of Norjaurios Cochas. She will talk about the robust measures of ecosystem-based adaptations for mountains, referring on the monitoring system, especially in the experience that they carry out at the land reserve of Norjaurios Cochas. She has a specific she has a different sensibility because she performs, she paints, and that gives her another view, another approach to work with that. Annalie, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Juan. Thank you for the presentation. I don't know if you hear me. Yes, we hear you, but you can get closer to the mic, please. Now? Yeah, better. Great. Good morning. Good afternoon. And maybe good evening in Asia. What I cannot see is my presentation on the screen. I don't know if... There. It's there. Yes, I can see it. I will present the monitoring system that has been developed for adaptations-based ecosystems, robust measures, for this project that has been carried out, that is finishing, in the Norjaurios Cocha Landscape Reserve. The contents of the presentation is a brief presentation of the measures that we have done, the problems and robust measures implemented. I will briefly go there, how it was designed, the monitoring systems for the robust measures, and the monitoring system that we used, and some final considerations, final thoughts. Introduction. This project, the IBA Mountain, is carried out in Nepal, Ugal, and Peru. We have the PNUMA with UECN. In Peru we have with Ministry of Environment through natural systems of protected areas of Peru, and specifically with the landscape reserve, Norjaurios Cocha. Here we have with UECN and the Mountain Institute in order to implement a third component, which is the implementations of the ecosystem-based adaptation measures, especially robust measures. First, we have to define how we understood ecosystem-based adaptation, the project, as a adaptation for climate change based on sustainable change, preservation, and preservation of ecosystems. Within this, we have the robust measures, or no regrets in English, that we consider as ecosystem-based adaptation measures, which is IBA measures, that must offer social, environmental benefits and also economical benefits under any climate scenario. Future one, they do not require exhaustive evaluation, but part of that evaluation of perceptions and priorities of local communities. Under this framework, we worked. And what is the context? The project is located in Latin American mountains, South America. We can see on the bottom left part Peru, Central Mountains, and there we have a landslide reserve known as Scotia. We can see it on the screen, and we worked specifically with Canchayo and Miraflores communities. The greatest project was worked also on the Tanta community, but we will talk about the Canchayo Miraflores measures applied there. We see that both communities are quite important because they are the head of the basins of important rivers, which are important rivers in Peru. The ecosystems that we have here, it's a high mountain ecosystems. The landscape reserve has almost 70% of the land is actual crops. We have white mountains. Also, it's the zone that among 2,800 and 3,000 meters over the level of the sea. We have pictures from Miraflores and Canchayo. We have them at the same level, but have different situation. Miraflores there's more slopes, differences in height, and Canchayo has a landscape related to hills. Both communities have a really cultural heritage quite important. We have different cultures there, Yauyos, the Incas. Mainly we can see that in Miraflores we have different agriculture measures that are quite old, that come from different cultures, so we have a great tradition in managing this ecosystem. What are the problems here? How we design the robust measures? In regards to this, according to the vulnerability done in this zone, we forecast that the temperature were going to increase, and there were going to be changes in precipitation, not in amount but in the patterns that could lead into more long-term droughts, intense rains, and since this is a zone where the animals eat, it could carry out fire. With the vulnerability in Miraflores and Canchayo, they have a information based on diagnosis for these communities. For designing the measures, we carried out a rural diagnosis along with communities and internal participants. So the results that we got is that in both zones there was a problem of overeating from the animals. So the amount is being reduced. There is a lack of water in the droughts, area. And they do have water, but there's not a good distribution. There is an organizational weakening for natural resources management, specifically in Canchayo, and we see the low commitment for management of the of crops and etc. Briefly, what we design as a measure for Canchayo Miraflores, we have a robust measure. We have three components: institutional organization, community strengthening of local capabilities and local knowledge, and green-gray infrastructure. In the organizational strengthening, we work the plans of graze and water at all communities, and as for green-gray infrastructure, we worked sustainable management of grass and water. And here you have, we carried out the construction of a canal. Here you can have it. Here we have the lagoon here, the canal here, and that arrives to the high part of the community, which is some sort of the communal patio of the farm of the community, we can see here the map. The top part we have the lake, the small lake, the area where we have the lake, the communal farm, the top part, and that is we contribute to the irrigation service. The functioning goes on the micro basin of General Cuco, which is a micro basin of the Jaracanche River. That would be the most important impact. But the management plans carried out. In the case of Miraflores, we worked that component. In the case of Miraflores, we worked the three components for strengthening organization, strengthening the building capacities, and the green-gray infrastructure. The green-gray infrastructure implemented in Miraflores has to do with amplifying the fence for wetlands, the wetlands, and the first picture you can see the zone that has been protected. That also are dikes from the pre-Inca period. The community wanted to protect this because that is the source of water for the drinking water and for carrying out the animals. We implemented also a tubing that could get the water from this point to the Coruna, which is a sector where the community desired to create a sector of the territory in order to have more rotation areas, improve the rotation systems, and improve the condition of the grass. As we can see here, the land of the community is quite wide. The work was carried out in the micro basin of the low part, but the implementation of this infrastructure contributed to manage the low part in orange, because this rotation system of the animals is carried out in this part. Now the management plans contribute to this management plan, including the communal farm in Miraflores. How did we design the measures? I mean the monitoring system of the measures. We have to say that since this is a project carried out with several partners, we designed the indicators jointly with all contributors, including considering the implemented measures in other communities, which is the Tacna community. So we carried out a first proposal of indicators, specific indicators for the robust measures, and we worked jointly with all partners, and we received the support of the monitoring system center of UNEP, that it helped us to create specific indicators, and we had a lot of indicators that we had to choose, and we had to give some priorities to some sort of indicators specific for the robust measures. They had been implemented, monitored not long ago in September 2015, which is the close of the project. So what do we have to look for the change in what we were looking for in the implementation of robust measures? Here in the circle you can see the concept of the robust measure, which has to offer environmental benefits, support to ecosystem systems and biodiversity, social benefits, and economical benefits under any scenario that we have. The measures is what we want to generate, and the results, what we expect to change is a reduction of the vulnerability faced to climate change and an increase of resilience of communities of ecosystems. Based on that, we work a first list of indicators and benefits that we expected and the impact that we expected from this measure, and we started to define some indicators. Also, we added the work carried on with the monitoring system of UNEP, with whom we designed. The important part was to design indicators that consider the process of an ecosystem, the physical structure of the ecosystem, and the interactions of the structure of this ecosystem. We center of the graze ecosystem. Based on that, we had some specific indicators in order to measure the functioning of the ecosystemic indicators of the grazing areas. But we had almost a list of 34 indicators, and we had to give priority to some of them. You have to prioritize. So we consider some criteria as the cost, the time generated, the cost, and the interests and the capacity, local capacities that we consider what were the interests of the community and the interests of the reserve, but it's just a reserve. The capacity for these indicators to measure the robustness of measure, and the capacity of these indicators to measure the reduction of vulnerability of population, and the capacity of indicators in order to measure the increase of the ecosystem, and the capacity of the indicator to measure the impact of the measure in lifetime of the project. And that was a challenge for the indicators, because the project is a 2-year project, and for the ecosystem-based adaptation, it's a quite short time period in order to measure the impact. This is a chart that we worked with a national project, the monitoring system, that includes 3 aspects: the evaluation of the impacts, operational aspects, and the evaluation of exposition. We, in the robust measures, will present only the impacts, evaluation of impacts, but we weren't able to include the exposition evaluation, because that determines how the atmospheric processes impact on the measures. Monitoring system implemented for robust measures. Finally, after the prioritization carried out, we had 8 indicators. For environmental indicators, we didn't consider economic indicators, but we carried out a economic evaluation that could help us with economic impact. Among the social economics, we have the knowledge indicators and practice indicators, and some other indicators related to knowledge, and 2 indicators related to strengthening, organizational strengthening, that were seen through the honoring of initiatives for the initiatives that we had after the implementation of this model. These indicators were directed to see the impacts or the improvements or strengthening of adaptation capabilities through this change. But the environmental indicators that were measured were related to 2 points. One related to the condition of the grass, that have to do with the grass provision, and other related to the wetlands and the amount of small lakes. Those services indicators have to do with the hydric regulation system. Here I won't go into much into detail, but we have some methods used for the measuring of the social indicators. In the case of knowledge and practice indicators, it was quite complex to try to synthesize all the work in the work carried out and put it in the quantitative indicators. So the information that we used was qualitative and was done through auto evaluation, where the community members evaluated using some criteria their level of knowledge and practice as at the beginning of the project and at the end of the project. Also, the indicators related to strengthening of organization have to do the management of grades, the generation of strategies and initiatives carried out through this and through implementation of this structure were measured through verification methods of the existence of these plans and initiatives that existed. Now, as for the honoring level is an indicator. Actually, the indicators that are not highlighted, it's an indicator that affects the community and the reserve, and it needs to be monitored, continually monitored by this. And we have to see how they continue in this. In the environmental indicators, as for the grass condition in the drought area, in this case, the environmental indicators, it's important for both cases, as for the grass and for the water, to measure activities in two periods, in drought areas and in the rain time period. It's important for the reserve to measure the grass condition indicators, because that will contribute to the decision making of the communities in the way they manage the grass and the advances of the progress of conservation in this reserve. The flood indicators, the floods and the flow indicators, there is an interest from the community and from the reserve to measure these indicators at a long time, and there's a recommendation to. It's quite important this water topic, because according to the water availability, it depends on the cattle depends on this, and these are indicators that the community and the reserve are interested in measuring over time. This is an example. I'm not going to present the results, but for you to see briefly the results that we obtained from this first monitoring. We have a baseline in September 2013, when we carried out the diagnosis, the assessment, and we had a lot of information. We collected a lot of data, but we didn't have the time to establish from that time the baseline, which is quite important and was complicated to gather all the information in order to build the report of the monitoring system. But the baseline was created for September 2013, and the end of the end of the project was September 2015. We can see here some topics that we addressed in the practice. We have had some changes, yes, small changes. Also, assessment carried out at community members at the community level, and change in practices. The compliance level of the plan, management of grass and water. We had no strategy at the beginning, and at the end we had some strategies and some initiatives for managing. Same thing, the initiatives carried out after the implementation of infrastructure. We tell us that there has been a requirement for developing initiatives in order to manage the infrastructure and to carry out the projects that we're proposing. These are the environmental indicators. We see that there have been changes. It is important to point out that the impacts in the ecosystems are long-term. It's quite difficult to see the impact and the condition of the grass has to be carried out in 2 and 3-4 years. Despite that, we have seen some small changes that have happened. The area that we have now, that's the grazing area, at the rough period, they have a relative management, and the flows. In the baseline, we didn't have the data here in the general country. We have the data now, and we hope that we can continue to analyze this in the next years. And there is a number of pokias, the small lakes that we have. What is the influence that they have with infrastructure implemented? There is an infiltration in the top part that, according to a study, and therefore we have the data collection, a number of small lakes, in order to see this is an impact carried on different aspects, and we are able to be sure that impact is carried out with the registry of these indicators over time. This economic valuation is not part of the monitoring system by itself, but it helps us to understand the economic benefits. For this economic valuation, we use 2 methods. One, analysis cost-benefits methodology. Initial one, where we measure this is the provision of water with projection to 20 years and with scenarios. I'm sorry, I'm going over time. One time. So we have some results of cost-benefit analysis, and we had some cost-benefit analysis participative, which is quite important to allow us to measure not only these services, but ecosystem aspect, social, of the climate change, and gives us the perception and evaluation of the community in regards to those services, those impacts. Also, we carried out the monitoring system can be quite qualitative, and it's important to understand the context. And I think that we carried out two times a year. It froze. Can you hear me? So a tool, this is the friction that contributed to make changes during the project, and contributed to the development of the capacities of the population in management capacities also. We carry out systematization that contributes to the lessons learned and some accomplishments from different perspectives. Some final thoughts. The way we see this is quite complex. We have something that a lot of things that have to be measured in these ecosystems. The ecosystem systems in university, the influence of climate change, social development of adaptive capacities is quite complex and also comprehensive. As I mentioned, the impact of the EVA measures are observed in medium, long term. Adaptive measures are not occur as fast as 2 years. It's a long-term process and need to be observed at long term. Some Same thing goes for the ecosystem systems that are changes that go at the long term. A lot of these indicators we have been measured it, but the impacts are going to be able to be measured in the long term. In order to have a trustability importance, the indicators, social indicators, have been quite important. One of the most difficult to establish a methodology and to measure them. The social changes was, if we consider social changes, it was complex to measure that. So we had a lot of help by carrying out the evaluation from the community members, but we had some qualitative contributions in regards to this indicator, especially because this project had a participation approach where from the design of the measures, the implementation and all actions were carried out in a consensus manner with the approval of community. It would be interesting to carry out a participative monitoring. We were not able to do this, but we collected some proper interests of the community under reserve in key topics that they wanted to measure. We finished the project now, and the monitoring is in hands of the reserve and the community, and that contributes the relationship between the reserve and the community, because the community can verify the impacts of the project and the impacts mainly for decision making of the community as for the resource management. It is important in all projects to have a baseline. It's quite important. We were not able, we did a diagnosis that helped us, but we were not able to do it with all indicators. And the prioritization of indicators. We can have quite interesting indicators, but they need to be according to the capacity, the existing resources, and the needs of the population. Context indicators are quite important also because they indicate the influence that might have the social aspect and the political aspect that can change the impact of this measure. That happened with the Kanchai community, that they had a board of directors that approved the measure, but the new board here have some other perspective for the development, and that could change the impact of the measure or the level of the impact. It's important to consider also the indicators, climate indicators, or the atmospheric process and how they impact in that measure. We were not able to measure that, but we recommend that that could be carried out. It was very important for us to have the results, the qualitative results, or the application of learning tools in the application, or the economic value in participative, or the systematization that help us to understand the context and understand the sense and the perception of the community and all partners. Well, thank you very much. I think that is it for my presentation. Thank you, Anneli. It's quite interesting. It was quite interesting, I think, that you added or developed in a way what Timo and Matthias also pointed out. One is the time, that necessity of having some a bigger aspect. When we talk about weather or climate, it's we talk about 30 years because it's an average, and I think that monitoring systems must consider that. Second thing that I think that is quite important in your intervention is the fact that the indicators have to be agreed on consensus, and that is why the participative culture of indicators that you build, I think that is quite important. And finally, the number of indicators that in 3 interventions, that's a topic that returned from going from 34 indicators to 8 indicators that indicates the importance of having less indicators. We have to have a good aim for the indicators. So I think that time's up. I think that time's up. And questions, please. If you have any questions, we can leave them for the platform where we can, where you will have the presentations. And I think that we can discuss furthermore there. I think that it's quite important, the mountain ecosystems. As for the rainy wetland forest zones of Vietnam, I think it's quite important for the application of this project. To end, I think Dennis has something. No. Thank you very much to our 3 people presented, our 3 presenters, Timo, Matthias, and Anneli, and we hope to continue this topic online on the platform. We have an initial date to end on 20 December, and thank you very much to you all, and we continue, and we will see you online. Thank you very much.